So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio.
My husband walked up to me a couple minutes ago and he said, so I just finished talking to a robot, and he's going on about dealing with customer service and how he's been talking to a robot. He's like, I decided to just talk to the robot like in a robot. Since I was talking to a robot, might as well. I mean, do you talk to a robot like a normal person, or do you talk to a robot like a robot? And how do you talk to a robot like a robot when a robot's trying to talk to you like a person? I can't handle these robots. I'm like yelling, please give me a human voice. I want to talk to a person. And then all of a sudden you lose the robot sound and they say, okay, let me connect you to a real person. Oh man. The world and the technology we have, has it made us more productive or less productive? That's a topic for another day. If you would like to hear some Lenten hacks, fasting hacks, whatever ideas and questions you might have, we're going to take some of your questions today at the end of the show, but we'll also be discussing them tomorrow, Ash Wednesday. So let us know. The number's 1-888-914-9149, or you can always reach out on Instagram. I put out a little question box. If you'd like to ask your question, let us know what you're looking for. Again, those fasting hacks, Lenten hacks, maybe favorite things that you've done during Lent that you'd also like to share that maybe was a game changer for you. Or if you were to talk to your younger self 20 years ago, what would you tell your younger self back then that you wish you had given up or done for Lent that has really helped you to grow in your faith? I would love to hear from you. Head over to my Instagram story, leave a comment in the comment box, or again, call us at 1-888-914-9149. So Virginia's been in the news over the last week or so because they've decided to delay implementing a transgender policy in their state, a policy that would have been implemented actually this month for all K through 12 schools. Basically, here's the deal. If a child identified as the opposite sex and they wanted to use the restroom, the changing room, play on the sports team, they should be allowed to without any question. That was what the policy said. Not only that, school teachers and administration couldn't doubt or question or oppose a child's newfound identity, or even should I say identity confusion if they're asking questions. All they can do is affirm this new so-called identity or possible question of identity. Because sometimes these kids come and say, I'm not really sure if I'm a boy or a girl, and suddenly a little girl starts being treated like a little boy for saying that they aren't sure. And if you oppose this, you are discriminating. Not only that, this policy was also insistent that if a child comes out and says that they identify as transgender, LGBTQ, you name it, that they, the school, is not supposed to tell the parents. They're supposed to keep secrets from children's parents. Did you hear that? The school administrations are supposed to have a secrecy between them and a child about LGBTQ identities. This sounds a whole lot like the entire abortion issue, where a child could go to a school counselor and say, hey, I want an abortion. In fact, a school counselor or teacher can help them get access to abortion, even take them off campus to access their abortion, and then bring them back and never tell that parent a single thing. Unbelievable that this was even a policy that was going to be implemented. In fact, it's something that's implemented in other states and various areas. But not only that, what we're seeing is that also staff and administrators were being pressured into what we call compelled speech. So now when I talk about compelled speech would be where you can only use certain language without regard to an issue. For example, this one is LGBTQ identifying language. Now, not only that, there's one more thing that we have to touch on, because I know I keep saying, well, what about this? What about that? We haven't even touched on the issue of safety. If a boy goes walking into a girl's restroom, it doesn't matter if he's dressed like a girl. It doesn't matter if he's got long hair. If he walks into a girl's restroom, a teacher, a school administrator, a janitor, no one is allowed to question it. No one's allowed to say, hey man, I think you're going into the wrong bathroom. This is a serious issue when it comes to safety for women. Safety for young girls. We live in a culture, I thought, that cared about sexual harassment and sexual abuse. Wasn't that what the whole Me Too movement was about? Everyone flashing their colors to let you know that they are opposed to sexual harassment. Everyone putting hashtag Me Too to share that they had been sexually abused. Do we really care, or are we just okay with this policy? I mean, this is unbelievable that this is a policy that we are allowing to occur. But here's the deal. Virginia parents commented on a public comment opportunity that the government was offering before this policy went into effect at the beginning of the month. And so many parents commented, in fact, 2-1 parents were opposing this policy, that Virginia has delayed implementing this transgender policy for the schools. Why? Because parents are concerned about safety. Parents are concerned about honesty and not having teachers pressured into keeping secrets about their kids. This is what happens when parents care, when parents speak up, when they say something. This is a big deal. Listen up. Things change when we say no. What's at jeopardy? The happiness of kids, honesty about their bodies, protection from sexual abuse. Because here's the other thing that's happening. If a child goes up to a school counselor or a teacher and tells them that they identify as LGBTQ, guess what happens? That school teacher or counselor is compelled to help usher them into the LGBTQ community. And this is what's scary, and I say this over and over again, and I know it upsets people. I don't like even saying it sometimes because I have family and loved ones who have identified as same-sex attracted, who have lived their lives, who have had partners, lifelong partners that I've known who have been around our family. And I'm not saying that every person who struggles with gender identity or same-sex attraction is a pedophile, but what I am saying is that it is very, very common among this movement of sexual identity. And so what often unfortunately ends up happening is that these kids are ushered into an LGBTQ lifestyle with adults who want to have intimate adult relationships, and they're doing so with young children. They are grooming them and coaxing them into a lifestyle and adult mature relationships that are not appropriate. And so this brings up the question, well, people say, well, as long as there's consent, we're okay with kids participating in these relationships because kids should be able to decide for themselves. Same thing with regard to the abortion and contraception issue. People say, well, as long as a child wants an abortion, that should be given to them. That's their consent to the abortion, their consent to contraception. And parents, and in many states, for example, in California, their child as young as 12, 13, can be put on hormonal contraception without a parent even knowing. In fact, a doctor can ask a parent to leave the room so that they can talk to a child about their reproductive, so-called health care. All of this crosses over into the abortion issue, the LGBTQ issue, that we are no longer seeing differences between men and women, and we don't want to talk about differences between men and women because that's so-called sexist or that's discriminatory. But you know what? We have to speak up, and kudos, props to the parents of Virginia, 2-1, who spoke up, and it's delaying the implementation of this transgender mandate on the state of Virginia. I hope people continue to speak up and fight to the end, no matter how ugly it may get, no matter what, if you're called a bigot or transphobic. We know the truth. We know the honesty about these issues, and we have to be willing to have the relationships and conversations to help people understand that we're not just being hateful and discriminatory and picking on a subset of people. It's not the case. And if you think so, I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear why you think that opposing such a policy is hateful. Let me know. Give me a call. send me a message. I would love to hear from you. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie. If you'd like to share the podcast or subscribe if you haven't already, head over to relevantradio.com/trending. Coming up a little later, we're going to dive deeper into this transgender issue and talk about a whistleblower from Planned Parenthood who shared that actually Planned Parenthood is the leading provider of cross-sex hormones for kids who want to identify as transgender. And they're actually allowing for changes to take place to kids' bodies in these Planned Parenthood facilities. This is something you don't want to miss. We'll be discussing it a little later on. Joining me now is my good friend, Father Tim Grumbach from St. Augustine Parish in the Diocese of Los Angeles. He's involved with Life Teen. He's involved with Young Catholic Professionals and a number of other ministries here in Southern California. Father Tim, welcome to Trending.
It's so good to be here. I'm glad I at least could call in. You know, just the last couple of days have been a little bit rough. I'm getting my voice back. I had a little bit of a cold, so we were kind of laughing about that. And I'm glad that's all it was, especially these days whenever you start having a tingle in the throat or a cough. You know, you might do I have to go get a test? Do I have to go get a vaccine?
Coronavirus!
Yeah. But fortunately, it's just a little bit of a cold. I know how my body works, and I knew it'd take about a day and a half to get things back together. I was laughing about it, too, with some friends because probably about 3 or 4 weeks ago, I texted them like, I could use a little bit of a quarantine when Ash Wednesday comes because I can't take any more of these bad jokes about how we're going to be distributing ashes. You know, I'm gonna be the guy on the freeway overpass pouring ashes down on cars, laughing maniacally. So when you hear about a priest getting arrested, that'll be me. So I could use a little quarantine during Ash Wednesday, but then it almost came true. But praise God, health is coming back, and it's not too serious. So
I love it. I'm glad to hear you're feeling better. And who knows, if we see sprinkling and any bridge protests, we'll know that Father Tim is up there with the other priests leading the charge to get everyone their ashes. Drive-by ashes, right? I mean,
we're gonna be like Jonah walking through Nineveh.
So, Father Tim, there was this article that was sent to me a couple months ago, just before I had the baby. We didn't have the opportunity to talk about it, but it's a woman icon of the church. It's published by My Feminine Life, and it was really fascinating to see this comparison between women in their life cycle and the experience they have as women and the church, and how the church is referred to as feminine. The church has liturgical seasons, periods of rest, of growth, of energy and creativity within the church, and how it was really fascinating, without getting too far into the weeds, how this comparison goes so much more profound when we think about how a woman is literally a different chemical makeup every single day of her monthly cycle, and how there are naturally built-in times throughout the month where she has less energy, where she needs more recuperation and rest, where she's able to have be at a peak point of energy in her month and have a greater sense of creativity and even of generosity is written in here. And I thought it was a fascinating comparison to the church's liturgical seasons as well, and the opportunity for growth. And I would even say dependency on these seasons that we have.
Yeah, I've heard some strange analogies before comparing the church to the bride of Christ. One of those, of course, without going into too much detail, involved an image of the priest lying down during his ordination. And let's just say becoming intimate with the
Father.
So there are some strange analogies that come with this image of the church as the bride of Christ, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But it's such a profound and ancient image, and I would say goes further back than the church itself, back into our Jewish roots and ancient Israel and all of salvation history. From the moments in the prophets, especially, you can think of like Hosea and Isaiah, looking at the people of God, looking at ancient Israel as the bride of the God of Israel, so that their whole year, even their festivals throughout the year, were about them becoming a gift of themselves, like a bride, to God as a father and as a husband. I think specifically of the three great feasts that all Israelites were expected in some way to come to Jerusalem to celebrate the feasts. You have Passover, and you have Pentecost, and you have the Feast of Tabernacles. And every one of those had something to do with the life-giving nature of agriculture and the harvest, so that it wasn't specifically about the female giving life, but it was about recognizing that God is the Lord of life. And it is something that happens in season and allows for times of fertility and infertility and times of great creativity, as this beautiful article writes about.
And of fasting, even thinking about how, we're called to mortification. And there are certain times where I think women feel very mortified, where women feel so much more dependent on other people, where it's hard to say, like, I'm not as capable as I usually am of functioning in a particular way. This could be said, and it's even talked about in the article, where this happens through a lifespan of a woman as well. Prior to being able to have children, during a woman's fertile years, and then even in the menopause and postmenopausal phase. And I know, like, this was a lot when I was reading it. Like, I'm like, Father, I apologize for sending this article to you. But then as I was kind of thinking through it, and I know you were as well, it was neat to see, as you just pointed out, the seasons and the sacrifices that were offered by the Jewish people, that they literally would work and work agriculturally to raise all this fruit and vegetables and to raise their cattle. And then here they were asked to give their very best, their first fruits, which is one of the feast days, to our Lord. And I mean, this was why Cain killed Abel, because he was jealous, because Abel gave his best. And he couldn't handle that. He gave his perfect, most pure sacrifice he could of his animals and the fruits and the vegetables of the field. And so this comparison to women and women having the ability to conceive children, to give their life for children, I thought did have a moment of profound meaning, where we're reminded that even when it's difficult in life, God provides us a season of rest. God provides us with the energy to give. God really does give all of those provisions, just as he gives everything that could possibly be needed to his church, if only we're faithful and respect it.
Yes, and reading articles like this, I'm always learning something new, of course. We got some information about a woman's cycle and natural family planning while we were in the seminary. So those classes are taught. But to learn from the experience of couples that I work with in marriage preparation and in marriage counseling, and to learn the very real and lived experience of that, I can see the way that it's lived out, even liturgically, through the church seasons, and how beautifully this article puts that together. And so one of my favorite images that I ever received about the church as a mother is seeing the Easter Triduum as the womb of the church. And so during those 3 days of celebration and liturgy, all one liturgy, technically, by the way, that the liturgies never end, they just continue over 3 days, that culminate in the moment of baptism, of rebirth. And so it's so beautiful just to attend and assist at and be a part of all of the liturgies during the Easter Triduum, and to know that you're pretty much in the same liturgy. You're in this womb being nurtured and receiving new life from God. And then there's this rebirth. There's this moment that during the Easter Vigil, when the great Alleluias are sung and people are coming out of the font, the baptismal font, with this new life, and seeing the church as mother. And again, an image that goes all the way back to the first mother, to Eve, at the moment of her creation. And I always love to point out that when Eve was created, the word that's used in that beautiful Hebrew poetry is not the same word used for when the animals were created, or even when Adam was created. It's rather a word that's translated throughout the rest of the Old Testament as she was built up. And it's the same word used for when temples and altars and cities are built throughout the rest of the Old Testament. So there's something different about the creation of woman, that like an altar, she's a place of sacrifice. Like a temple, a place where God desires to dwell in a unique way. And like a city, it's a place where where families dwell. And she's like a home. And so I know one of our favorite quotes from Edith Stein, from Saint Teresa Benedict of the Cross, is that women are fashioned as a shelter in which other souls can unfold. And so there's something beautiful about that motherhood, whether it be biological or spiritual, that is even expressed liturgically throughout the church year, and culminates in that moment of the Easter Vigil when new life is given. And, that's another brilliant image of baptismal prayers throughout the liturgy, is that recognition. I think it's in the nuptial blessing, or some part of the preface, perhaps, of the Mass of Matrimony, is recognizing that new lives are brought into this world so they can be brought to the baptismal font and into heaven through the baptismal rebirth. And so all of it leads up to this moment of birth in the Easter Vigil. And the church can be seen as a mother, and the Easter Vigil can be seen as the womb in which we are nurtured and brought to new life.
And it brings to question, tomorrow is Ash Wednesday, and we need to kind of ponder individually what each of us are in need of. Are we in need of rest this Lent? Are we in need of recuperation? Are we in need of a better sense of self-giving? This Lent offers us the opportunity to understand where we at. Take that evaluation and dig in. If you have a question about Lent and those Lenten hacks, give us a call, comment at relevantradio.com/trending to connect on social media and ask your question. I'll be right back with Father Tim Grumbach to talk about what's happening in China. Catholic Order of Foresters is proud to sponsor the Relevant Radio studio line. For information about employment opportunities and flexible premium life insurance plans, visit relevantradio.com/forester.
So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
Lenten hacks. We're going to unpack some later in the show and more tomorrow because it's Ash Wednesday. So throw out your questions. We want to hear from you. The number's 1-888-914-9149, or head over to my Instagram story or Twitter now. Comment on our tweet where we ask, what do you want to know? What hacks, what questions, what devotional questions? But here's my question to you. If you were to go back to yourself 20 years ago, what's the one thing you would have done during Lent that you did later in life that brought about tremendous fruits in your spiritual life, or maybe in your marriage, or maybe in a relationship with friends or family, in the workforce, being a workaholic? I don't know. What was it for you that you wish you'd go back and tell someone or yourself to do back then? Go ahead and let us know. Give us a call. Comment on Instagram. Lenten hacks today and tomorrow. We'd love to share your wisdom. Joining me now is Father Tim Grumbach, and we wanted to talk about the Uyghur internment camps in China and the horrifying genocide that is occurring there. We touched on it last week with Reggie Littlejohn. If you didn't catch that podcast, we'll post a link to it now because we talked about it from the perspective of abortion and sterilization. We'll touch on that as well a little bit today. But it was really standing out to me, Father Tim, the really indoctrination that's occurring in the camps where they're pushing this Chinese regime and brainwashing on the Islam people for being a people of faith only because they don't basically worship China and China's dictator.
Yeah, this is really heavy, and I'm just asking the Lord to touch my heart with this, just to let it affect me a little bit more. And I think of some beautiful prayers of the church, just asking the Lord to bring the gift of tears, like He brought the water out of the rock in the desert for His people of Israel, because this is some of the first news that I've seen in over 40 days because of Exodus 90 and being away from social media for the most part. And so for this to be my introduction back into it in a certain sense, I've seen some of the news. I know a little bit what's happening, but to let this be the way that I dive back into it, it's pretty heavy, but it's a really providential, grace-filled moment to have the Lord invite me back into something like this, that I may not, there's really not very much I can do about it in my station of life, but to know about it and to be praying about it and to read these stories and hear these names and say before the Blessed Sacrament and the Tabernacle, Lord Jesus, you can do more with this than anything I could hope to do right now. And so just to, as a people, just entrust that to the Lord, I think that could be one of the most powerful things that we do. But knowing about it is so important.
I'm so glad that you brought up the context of your receiving this information, because often it can be so overwhelming to know everything in an instant that happened on the other side of the world. It can be so overwhelming, and you go, well, what can I really do other than this impacting my heart, my prayer life? And we have to be able to have that spiritual maturity so that we can have a sense of emotional maturity when these circumstances in another part of the world occur to us that we can't control. Because otherwise we could kind of get into a little bit of a depression, anxiety, fear, sorrow even. And so when we really take the opportunity to go, Lord, I abandon this to you. This is something that's just too much. I can't do anything, but I'm going to hand it over to you. But here's something that really stood out to me about this story. If you don't know what is happening, basically the Muslims that have settled there in Uyghur, who are in the Uyghur internment camps, who have been brought in for their faith because it's in opposition to the communism of China and their dictator, they are being harshly dealt with. If you're under 40, you can imagine the level of sexual abuse and rape that's occurring for the people. If you're over 40, they're being very aggressive and violent with the older women. And I bring it up specifically from the perspective of women because we're seeing forced sterilization, forced abortion on the Uyghur people as well as on the people of China. And we've had, this outright calling from the United States of the fact that this is genocide here. And it's, I think, standing out to me, Father Tim, because it's a reminder that women are treated harsher in the midst of war, in the midst of internment camps, in the midst of the history of any type of warfare, that it's the women who truly do suffer the most. We're talking about physical abuse, as well as sexual abuse, separation from their children, the forced abortions and sterilization. And it makes me beg the question, how can we rebuild a culture that protects women?
Right. And because we were just talking about the beauty of a woman's body and experience as a mother and just her femininity being expressed in the life of the church, liturgically and in seasons, we see the dignity and the beauty of motherhood and of femininity. And so that's why we can see something like this as a diabolic and direct attack on the dignity of women, and that it's something that's been happening, well, I guess since the garden, you could say, that we see it all throughout Scripture. There's one moment in particular that I'm thinking of. I guess it's a couple moments right at the end of the book of Judges, where the tribe of Benjamin commits this grave act of sexual violence, and it causes the first civil war in Israel. And then the results of that is the loss of so many men of the tribe of Benjamin. And then they have to steal women from another tribe in order to raise up the children of Benjamin again. And so, this is not something to look up at and say, hey, this is what God wanted because it's in the Bible. But it's at the end of this spiral cycle of Judges that things are getting worse and worse because they don't have a king and they don't let the Lord be their king. And so I'm seeing this as something that's directly a diabolic attack on the femininity of women, something that's been happening throughout all of history, something happening throughout all of salvation history. And if we keep letting this happen over and over again, then we're letting the devil into our world in a way that God cannot possibly be pleased with, and requires our prayer and our sacrifices and our penance.
Mm-hmm. And if you're just joining us, you're listening to Trending with Timmerie. That's Father Tim Grumbach here on Relevant Radio. You can catch the podcast online, relevantradio.com/trending. As we talk about rebuilding a culture that protects women, one of the challenges can be the attitude that we women have that I'm strong and I don't need no man to help me. Also, kind of this environment where, I don't need anyone, that I'm capable, and that it's a sign of weakness to be dependent in any way on someone else. And so what's happened is that women are being told that you don't need anyone. And on the flip side, men look and go, well, you don't need me. And so what it's created is it's created a culture of lack of willingness, I would say, on the part of men to be the protectors that truly they are called to be, that is built into their nature, yet the culture conditions them not to violate the boundary of a woman's strong persona.
Right. And I've seen it just recently too, and just hearing the way that young men talk, and their confusion about what it means to be a protector and a provider, and what it means that that there may be some societal images given to them that they just can't live up to. They can't put themselves up to, and they feel like, well, that means I must be a failure and I must not be able to protect and provide the way that very strong man on TV does, or whatever it is. And then they begin to seek maybe more feminine expressions of their humanity, and they become afraid of the very idea of masculinity, because they're not as big, as strong as those athletes they're seeing on TV. That they don't see that as in the proper way of motivation, and because of that, women don't have men who protect and provide, because we're getting these distorted images of what it means to be a man as well.
Mm-hmm. In a culture of profound, I think, astronomical numbers with regard to sexual abuse, and really fed by the video gaming industry and by the pornography industry, we need to be more intentional as people of faith to not wait for someone to ask for provisions with regard to safety, to be willing to walk that person out to their car late at night without them asking. I can't tell you how often I have it. Let's say, when I was very single and traveling around, when I'd ask, oh, can you walk me out to my car afterward? How some people, even people of faith, would kind of treat it like a hindrance. Like it was work. But then other people, oh my gosh, the fact that you asked, they were so grateful for the opportunity to serve. So there are two ends of the spectrum. One, it's like, seriously, you need me? Are you scared? And almost like you feel made fun of. On the other end, people, gentlemen who say, of course, thank you for asking. I'm happy to. Almost like I should have thought of it ahead of time.
Yeah, and it makes me think of a story that a friend of mine was just sharing with me a couple of weeks ago about how she and a couple of her girlfriends were invited over by three men just to have a dinner as friends. And the guys in the group text were kind of joking around, like, oh, did you get the frozen pizzas ready, or something like that? And so they were like, I don't know how fancy this dinner is going to be. And they arrived, and it was just a beautiful dinner for friends to have. There was no romantic expectations or anything like that. It was just, three men treating three women to a lovely evening of friendship. And it was such a beautiful expression of care and love for friends, rather than this, like you said, like a pornified, right, this pornified culture where there's these expectations. But also what happens with men in this pornified culture is this lack of initiative and just looking into oneself and one's computer for intimacy, rather than looking for friendship, where men can get together and show that care and that love for women without any of these unrealistic expectations.
What you were talking about was hospitality on the part of men, not just when we talk about hospitality as a virtue. And it's one of my favorite, I would say, virtues that I think particularly play a role for women. But it's a part of, I would say, the virtue of responsibility for men, that hospitality falls under that. And that comes back, I think, to that idea for men that men are called to be providers, to provide provisions, to provide safety for women. And so that story really stood out to me. And I want to share kind of as well my experience during those last months of my pregnancy. I could carry a whole lot less. I felt more vulnerable if I was in an unsafe place. I remember being in downtown San Diego, and I was trying to get food between a wedding and going somewhere, and I was by myself, and we'd just gotten a new car, and I wasn't used to driving such a big car. Of course, you got to get the baby car. So I'm in downtown San Diego. I parallel park, which I'm horrible at, and I run in to get food. And I'm like really, really nervous, and I'm kind of like watching the car, and there are all these homeless people everywhere, some really big dudes. And I end up asking the guy at the front, I say, can you walk me out to the car? And can you just bring me my food out there? I'm just going to stay in my car, I think. And he looked at me first like I was crazy. And I said, look, I'm pregnant. I'm scared. I'm not good at driving in this area. Like, please, I'll just feel more comfortable if you bring it to me. And all of a sudden, his attitude changed. It's like he needed it explained to him for a moment. He said, sure, I'd be glad to. And I said, if you could just kind of keep your eyes over there near where my car, I was so nervous being in that area. And he's like, okay, sure, that's fine. I think thought I was being a little dramatic, but then I'm standing there just waiting to get my drink to go to the car. And this guy comes up and he had just gotten out of jail. He's standing there. He tells the guy at the checkout that he just got out of jail. He's acting really antsy. The guy's kind of staring at me, and it was just really awkward dynamic. And I think that this probably 19-year-old suddenly got it. And he goes, okay. And he's giving me kind of this glance like, I understand what you're saying now. But for some reason, we have to spell it out today in order for young men or even, middle-aged men to understand this. They've lost the sense of being a gentleman that the older generation, in many ways, still does have, thankfully.
Yes, and this all does speak into that huge issue of what's happening in China and what's been happening throughout all of history, but especially today in China, is that, yes, there are things that we can do diplomatically and on the world stage to protect these women. But it also begins with a conversion of heart in us men in our daily lives, and the kind of expectations that women can have that men will be protectors and providers. And it happens in our daily lives, our daily conversion of heart, so that the world can be changed, without it being too much of a cliche, one person at a time, and that our hearts of stone will become hearts of flesh again.
We're a little more than a month away from the feast day of St. Joseph, March 19th, right smack there in the middle of Lent. And I'm reminded that perhaps you don't feel like you know how to be that provider. Perhaps you don't feel like you know how to protect women, or you feel awkward, like you're offending them by offering to carry something or walk them out. Pray to St. Joseph to instill in you the virtues of masculinity, of provisions, of protecting, that you maybe weren't otherwise taught. Ask him to be that leader for you, that mentor for you, and how to live out your masculine virtue that I can tell you us women are hungry to see in today's culture. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie. That's Father Tim Grumbach. I've tagged him on my Instagram page. You can find them there. Just go ahead and head over to relevantradio.com/trending to connect on social media. And if you have a question or a comment about Lenten hacks or what you'd tell yourself 20 years ago to have given up to bear additional fruits in your spiritual life, go ahead and give us a call. The number's 1-888-914-9149. We're about to close those phone lines. If you have a call, give it to us now. We'd love to hear from you.
We're talking about what you're thinking about. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
Are you ready to have those ashes sprinkled on top of your hair? I heard this is something that is being done. I'm going to have to think about that and comment on it tomorrow, to be real frank here. I think that there's a problem, again, when we are so insistent on this physical separation, as if people are dirty, as if people are diseased. I'll talk about it more tomorrow on the show. We're going to unpack some Lenten hacks this evening, but we'll also share more tomorrow. Karen just commented from the Family Rosary. She's our producer here at Trending, working behind the scenes, and she said, I'm going to have darker roots tomorrow. She's going to have that little sprinkle. I mean, at least the ashes are black, so no one's going to think you have dandruff, I guess, or lice or anything. So, that's the upside of this whole thing. I think instead of, people kind of walk around trying to show off their crosses. Oh, funny story. I'm totally going on a tangent here. But a few years ago, a dear friend of mine, we went through Lent, and we got nailed with ashes by Father. And so she had brought her Q-tip kit with her to really draw that massive cross on her forehead for Lent. It looked real good. Okay, she had the perfect cross. She even spread it a little further across the forehead. And after class that night, I think we were in grad school. We got out around 10:30. Oh, I hated those long nights. And so she was driving toward the freeway, and she was pulled over, I think for speeding on Ash Wednesday, something like that. I can't remember, but she was definitely pulled over. And the police officer's just looking at her kind of weird as he's, correcting her and giving her her ticket. And she says she takes a big, deep breath as he's writing up the ticket, and she looks in the mirror, and she goes, "Oh, Lord, forgive me." Here I am, so prideful, trying to draw this massive cross on my forehead for Ash Wednesday, really making sure that people know that I got my ashes today. And here I am getting a ticket for like disobeying the law of the road. And that police officer was looking at me like I was an absolute idiot. And I don't blame him. Here I was making a massive cross over my face. And that actually brings to mind the question, you actually don't have to wear your ashes. You can wipe them off, or you can choose to keep them on. And it's always a little bit of a dilemma, because on one side, I think people walk around like peacocks, like, hey, I got my ashes today. But on the other side, there are people, Ash Wednesday is the most attended day of the year for church. I'll be curious to see what stats and reports come out for this year, because it's the one day that people get something. They get something. They get their ashes. Not only do they get their ashes, it's something they receive. But also, I think it's a day where many people recognize I'm a sinner. And I appreciate that the church is accommodating and reaching down to people and giving us a moment and an opportunity of humility. So if you hashtag tomorrow, let us know. I'd love to hear your opinion on ashes and those Catholics who throw them up on Twitter and everywhere else. We'll be sharing some more Lenten hacks later today, but again, we're taking your questions. You can reach out to me on Instagram at Timmerie, that's Timmerie, and share with us what you would tell yourself 20 years ago that you wish you gave it for Lent to help really bring about some fruits and progress in spiritual life, or what questions you have. I want to touch first on something I mentioned earlier. There is a Planned Parenthood whistleblower who has come out and really addressed the fact that she worked for Planned Parenthood. This is an article written by Abigail Schreier, and you may remember she's the author of the book that I've been mentioning a lot, Irreversible Damage, The Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters. She was a writer, or is a writer for the Wall Street Journal, and she's continuing to chase down this transgender issue, and she's pro-transgender. But she has a problem with this agenda that's occurring and the pressure on young girls to come out as transgender when they're not. It's just a cry for attention, such as various eating disorders and other things can be a coping mechanism. And so here's the deal. She has reached out in some investigative journalism to a Planned Parenthood whistleblower who took to social media talking about how Planned Parenthood is a huge provider for cross-sex hormones. So a girl, and even in some states, specifically Oregon, I believe, a girl or boy who's 16 can go in and say that they want cross-sex hormones, they want testosterone, and you don't even need a medical doctor to start administering that. In fact, things are coming out. This is the hidden secret of Planned Parenthood, and we need to talk about it. For Central and Western New York State, the Planned Parenthood on their website said, quote, nationally, Planned Parenthood is the second largest provider of gender-affirming hormone care. That is, if a little girl says she's a boy and she wants cross-sex hormones, that Planned Parenthood is the second largest provider to go ahead and give those cross-sex hormones. We're talking about irreversible damage and even unknown long-term consequences for messing with the hormonal makeup of young women in particular. And here's the crazy thing. It's not a doctor that determines whether or not that girl receives cross-sex hormones. It's not a psychiatrist or anything like that. They don't even have a doctor on hand to talk to these girls. It's a clinic manager who ultimately decides whether or not these girls end up having cross-sex hormones. And this is unbelievable. And this woman, this whistleblower, we'll post the article to this because I think it's really fascinating. And we'll continue to unpack the story as the days go on. But we're understanding that in this one area, this whistleblower who left Planned Parenthood, who's all in favor of the pro-abortion provisions that the Planned Parenthood clinics have, she opposes this transgender craze. And she said they were having 1 to 2 new biological female teenagers coming in to seek testosterone per day. And how, in fact, in this one area, The number of teenagers over the course of the last couple years has been unbelievable. All these girls who are taking testosterone now. Some come in with their parents, but again, in some places, you don't have to have your parent involved in that decision. And so where she talked about how she recognizes that Planned Parenthood makes their, quote, bread and butter from abortion, and in fact, she supports that. She said trans-identifying kids are cash cows, and they are kept on the hook for the foreseeable future in terms of follow-up appointments, blood work, meetings, etc. Then she goes on to say, whereas abortion, hopefully, is a one-and-done situation. So she's in favor of abortion. She acknowledges that that's the bread and butter in terms of money for Planned Parenthood. But from having worked in there, she's saying that cross-sex hormones for little girls is a cash cow for Planned Parenthood. We need to understand that all of this is connected. Abortion, gender dysphoria, contraception. What happened? We need to kind of travel through and understand where the cultural mindset went, and the laws and the Supreme Court decisions really tell us. We saw Griswold versus Connecticut implemented, where contraception was decriminalized. It was opened up for everyone to have access to, right? It was allowed. Well, what happened? When we decriminalized from our laws in the United States contraception, we took babies out of sex. And that allowed us to take sex out of marriage. So when you take babies out of sex and sex out of marriage, there are two things that happen. One, there's no protection for the unborn, for the baby that's brought about in a culture that says babies and sex don't go together and they don't go in marriage. And so we needed the fail-safe of abortion. But on the other end of the spectrum, when we take babies out of sex and sex out of marriage, what happens? Well, suddenly we begin to lose a sense of understanding of what marriage is for. Suddenly we begin to lose a sense of understanding of what the function and the purpose of our intimacy, of our sexual identity is for. We completely lose track of what our bodies are made for and how they can function. And so this is really important that we understand that, again, we have Griswold versus Connecticut. Then we have no-fault divorce starting in California and sweeping across the nation. Well, of course, when you took babies out of intimacy, well, now you can take intimacy out of marriage, and now there's no reason for marriages to be glued together. There's no reason to be glued together and bound to children. And then what happens? Well, you need the fail-safe, because if you take babies out of intimacy, what happens? Well, then you need the fail-safe when accidents happen. You need the backup contraception, which is an abortion. And then you create this confusion, this spiral about the identity of male and female. It's no wonder that second wave feminism talked about the equality of men and women. They didn't talk about equality. They talked about sameness, that there's no difference between men and women. And so what do we have? That's where we now have Obergefell versus Hodges from 2016. Where suddenly we're saying it doesn't matter if you marry a man and you're a man, or if you marry a woman and you're a woman, because our identity as male and female supposedly doesn't matter. And you can do whatever you want with your body. See how all of these moral issues regarding intimacy and the understanding of our bodies have really played a part one on the other? It's very important we see this connection. And this is why Planned Parenthood is a champion of cross-sex hormones for girls, pretending that girls are boys and vice versa. This is why Planned Parenthood is a champion and a cash cow, because they get this is not just the ideology that they are pushing forward, but this is the business model. This is the income that they want to bring about. And so we'll continue to unpack this, but if you have questions, let us know. Head over to relevantradio.com/trending, because this is a tough topic. And maybe you don't want to feel judgmental or be called that homophobic person for calling this out. Let's talk about it. I want to hear from you. How are you finding yourself stuck or uncomfortable in conversations surrounding these issues? Okay, tomorrow we're going to unpack some Lenten hacks. It's Ash Wednesday tomorrow, but I wanted to throw out and respond to a couple questions that came in on Instagram. One is chicken meat? Can I have chicken on Wednesday or on Fridays during Lent? Yes, chicken is meat. And kudos, because this was actually a woman asking this question this time. Usually this is a question I get from the dudes. Men, chicken is still meat, okay? I just want to be clear here. Another person asked for fasting tips. I'm going to share those tomorrow, but this is why I'm a huge fan of the keto diet. Keto diet for women, you always want to make sure you're doing an alkaline version of keto, and women can be more sensitive with dairy, so it's important that you're not just becoming a dairy intake machine, because that can make it difficult as well. But some people do really well with dairy. Another question is Sundays in Lent. What the heck do they mean? 40 days, not 40 days? Well, we'll explain it more tomorrow, but Lent has actually been extended so that you can, on Sundays during Lent, maybe indulge in some of those practices or foods that you'd otherwise given up. However, we'll unpack whether that's beneficial or not, what the history surrounding Sundays in Lent really were, and to really help you have a guideline for yourself of how you're going to live Sundays during Lent. So thanks for being with me. Tomorrow, Sister Tina Alfieri, who is an addiction specialist, will join us to talk about Lenten hacks. Enjoy the podcast. Head over to relevantradio.com/trending. Don't miss a show. I will talk to you tomorrow.